you guys think about New York City, a lot of upstate folk might think of concrete and garbage and possibly the smells. But I'm here to tell you that we have hundreds of acres of natural areas in the 5 boroughs of New York City, and a lot of these natural areas feature fisheries. So, if nothing else, if you go home with nothing else, go home knowing that we do have nature in the city, and a lot of our residents enjoy it. So, to start with some background, I'll be focusing on freshwater recreational angling today. I know that New York City has a lot of saltwater coastline, but this is just based on fresh. Most of our freshwaters are within New York City parks, and we have shore fishing only, so there is no boating access permitted. We have 12 primary waters that the DEC manages in Region 2. Most of them are under 20 acres, but we do have 55 acres. And I just wanted to share the fishing pressure in our top 2 waters. So in the Harlem Mirror Creel Survey in 2015 showed that we have about 2,000 angler hours per acre. And then Prospect Park in 2014, we found around 300 angler hours per acre. This is hard to compare to other parts of the state because most lakes in the rest of New York do have boating access, so that would change the pressures. But we tried to compare to stream fishing, which would be shoreline access only. We know it's not quite the same, but we found values between 14 and 750 angler hours per acre. So we can say that we do have very high pressures, probably due to our high population. And we have a unique management in the city because it is catch and release fishing only, so there is no harvest of largemouth bass permitted. And so I'll be focusing on largemouth bass as the targeted species because a lot of anglers do target it. We've been conducting boat electric fishing surveys since 2009 with the DEC, and we also have statewide bass population metrics available to us to compare. So, historically, focus in Region 2, which includes the 5 boroughs of New York City, has been on within water body population changes. So how are bass doing in this one lake over time? So the objective of this talk was to compare bass populations across our waters within New York City, and then also compare to state means to see how they fare. Before I go to methods, why should anyone care about bass in New York City? Like any other managers, we want to assess the ecological health of our fishery and be able to make changes when possible. And because we do have this unique management with catch and release only, it can be more difficult to make management changes. We can't just limit harvest or change the size regulations. So we really need to be on top of what's happening with our bass populations. And lastly, I wanted to highlight the value of our sport fisheries in New York City. We do have them, and a lot of people utilize them. And all the pictures here are pictures taken in our region. So whenever you see a big bass, it was caught in New York City. Okay, so what did we do? We included boat electric fishing surveys from 2012 to 2019 based on the DEC black bass sampling protocols. The metrics that we included are catch rates. This is number of bass per electric fishing hour. We included proportional stock density, or PSD, and relative stock density of preferred size fish, which is RSDP. Real quick, many of you might know this, but if you don't, to calculate PSD, you take the number of quality size fish, which is this fish in the middle here, and you divide it by the number of stock size fish, the smaller size fish, and you can get a proportion of different fish sizes in your lake. So this is like a numerical way to describe length frequency data. And then, so RSDP, you can take any other larger size fish, we use the preferred size fish here, and use that in our numerator, and you still keep stock size fish in the denominator. We also use relative weight, which is similar to condition for fish, and we use age at length. So we separated our surveys into spring and fall, just like the DEC manual does for the state. We calculated the means of each metric for each water body in each season. That sounds like a lot, but that's just, for example, number of fish captured in Prospect Park Lake in spring, and we got that mean. So we used the DEC fish calculator and R for analyses. We did t-tests between New York City and New York State metrics, and the DEC fish calculator allows us to rank our catch rates for fish of specific size groups across the state. and that also includes lake size, so that's pretty useful too. So a lot of my results will be on this map. So to orient you, these are the 5 boroughs of New York City. Each black dot represents a water body that the DEC manages, and we have surveys included in these locations. And all the data is broken down into quantiles, so all the low numbers will be in blue, the medium numbers in green, and the high numbers in red. So we can compare between water bodies. So I'll start with catch rates. So this is number of fish caught per electrofishing hour. And here, to begin with, we have the fall survey data. And all these boxes will be with this dark background for the colors. And then here we have the data for the spring. Any boxes that are touching are for the same water body. So for example, this 32 and 24, that's the same water body. 2 surveys, one in the fall, one in the spring. And all the spring surveys have that see-through background. And so I think one of the key takeaways here is that our catch rates are really variable. So they go as low as 13 up to 146. So very different. And another takeaway I want you to have is that here, for an example, this is 2 water bodies within Central Park in Manhattan. The north one, 140 value, that's in the Harlem Near. And then less than a mile away, this 13 value is Central Park Lake. They're in the same park, very close together, and they're very different catch rates. Similar trends with 2 water bodies in Staten Island down here, and 2 different parks that time. So we're not seeing any geographic or spatial patterns in terms of our catch rates in New York. So moving on to PSD, here are our values for the fall. And you'll see we have a lot fewer numbers now. We had to meet certain criteria to make sure these following metrics were giving us a real representation of the values that we see. So we have our fall PSD and we have our spring. And PSD can be used as a way to describe predator-prey relationships and to see if we have balanced populations. So these are just the PSDs of the largemouth bass. We did collect bluegill, which is a common pair for a largemouth bass for a prey species. And I'm not showing the PSD values for bluegill here, but typically it could be good practice to have your predator PSD values between 40 and 70. Those are kind of key numbers that can represent balanced populations. So once we pair our bluegill PSDs with this, we can probably say that most of our PSDs do suggest balanced populations between the 2. And then moving on to RSDP. So again, this is the number of preferred size fish over stock size fish times 100. So here are the values for the fall and for the spring. And we don't have any values in blue, so in that lowest quantile. And what this tells us is that we think we have a pretty good proportion of preferred size fish in our lakes. And this can be great for angling because that term preferred really comes from a size that anglers prefer to catch. So the size of fish that we do have is favorable for fishery and angler satisfaction. And then here we have relative weight. So that's for the fall and for the spring. And those of you familiar with relative weight, managers like to see values between 95 and 100 for fish that usually have a healthy prey forage base. And a lot of our values are below, just equal to or below 95. So it's safe to say that our relative weights are below average from what we would like to see. So now moving on to New York City compared to New York State means. So for catch rate and PSD and RSDP in the fall surveys, we did not see significantly different values between New York City means and the rest of the state. However, for relative weight, which we broke down into 2 size categories, stock to quality size fish and quality to preferred size fish, we did see that the relative weight in New York State was significantly higher than that of New York City. And we saw similar things for our spring surveys. So no differences again for catch rate and PSD and RSDP, but relative weights, this time just for stock to quality size fish, New York State again had significantly higher relative weight values than that in the city. So I mentioned the DEC fish calculator and ranking catch rates across water bodies at different sizes. When we used this tool, we found that 3 of our water bodies, the Harlem Mere, Prospect Park, and Willowbrook Lake, had catch rates that ranked in the top 10% of all New York State surveys. And that's for water bodies of all sizes. And then we did see on the opposite end, 2 water bodies, Clove and Willowbrook, had catch rates that ranked in the bottom 10% of state surveys for lakes of similar size. And that similar size is lakes below 50 acres. If you caught it, we have Willowbrook that made both of these criteria. We had very different results from electrofishing surveys in Willowbrook, so that's how we were in the top and the bottom, just based on that one water body. So to recap a little bit, I wasn't able to break down every metric by size in that table, but I did want to share that for stock size fish only, we did see catch rates to be significantly higher in New York City compared to the state. And we saw in the table that relative weights were significantly lower in New York City for all size classes. And then in the spring, we saw that they were once again significantly lower in just stock to quality size classes for relative weight. Lastly, I'm going to show age at length data. So here on the x-axis we have age, the y-axis is length in millimeters, and we have 2 water bodies where we did this data with, the Harlem Mere and Prospect Park, and then I also plotted New York State means. So Harlem Mere is in yellow, Prospect Park is in blue, and so what these are is the dots are means and the error bars represent the error. So for our 2 water bodies in New York City, you can see the error bars overlapping for many of these ages. So that suggests that they're not significantly different from each other for mean age at length. And then here we have New York State means kind of following the trend below. So I don't have the error from the state because that data wasn't available to me, but those are the means. So it seems to be that New York City bass, at least in these 2 water bodies that we looked at, are growing faster than bass in other areas of the state. But like I said, I don't have that error, so I can't say for sure that that's happening, and it looks like it would really be happening more at the older ages. So to summarize, the first objective was to compare bass populations across New York City waters, and all of our data suggests that our waters are highly variable, which could be another, it could also make it harder to manage our waters as one, so we might have to manage individual waters separately. Our second objective was to compare largemouth bass in the city to the rest of the state, and we saw for stock size fish specifically, New York City had higher catch rates than the rest of the state, paired with lower relative weights, generally speaking. So we also saw that it seems to be the case that New York City bass are growing faster than the rest of the state at the same age. So what does this mean? So because we saw low catch rates in some of our water bodies and we had very variable catch rates, we were wondering if this was due to the physical environment at all. So I did a simple linear model in R. We had turbidity values where we got them through Secchi depth. And so then I plotted those against our catch rates to see if there was any trend, and we didn't see a significant trend between these 2 variables, so for now we're ruling out turbidity as a cause. But then we're thinking maybe we got really low catch rates due to overgrown vegetation. During our prime sampling months, we do have a lot of overgrown vegetation in our lakes, and it can be difficult to access all those nooks and crannies where bass sometimes like to hide out. So we're going to keep an eye on this in the future. We also saw for stock size fish a negative relationship between catch rates and relative weight. And we're thinking this could have been indicative of low prey abundance. So if there are so many bass and not enough prey available for everyone to eat to satiation, this could be an issue. But we do catch a large abundance of bluegill and shiners. So we kind of cross that one out as a possibility. But we think just generally speaking, instead, this could be due to overcrowding. So maybe the bass just don't have enough room, there are too many of them, and not enough resources more generally. And then we think possibly our bass in New York City could be having higher growth rates, so they have larger lengths at age than the rest of the state, because we may have this longer growing period due to mild climates down in the southern part of New York. So to conclude, Region 2 is looking forward to scheduling future surveys to try to avoid vegetation so we can make sure we're accurately surveying all of our lakes and getting all the data points we can. We look forward to using our future survey data to identify long-term population trends, so we have a lot more values on those maps in the future to add to the repertoire. And then we look forward to increasing outreach and getting our environmental conservation officers involved if we do see any largemouth bass population declines, because we can't just change regulations, we need to use different resources to make sure anglers know there is a catch and release rule only, and that we're all following the rules. And we look forward to sharing more information on our website to our anglers that do frequent these lakes with high pressure, so they can know about our fisheries. That's it, and if I have time for questions.
Do you have time for a few questions?
Is catch and release imposed upon you because it looks like there's a stance?
I'm sorry, I
Is catch